Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's the Historical Gamer once again, and today we're returning to Soviet Corps, the expansion for Panzer Corps, which came out, like 2 months ago now. I had been doing a series on it and had kind of gotten paused amongst all my naval obsessions that have just come up. In fact, fun fact, I just ordered a book from Amazon called German Battle Cruisers, which looks really interesting. It kind of details the history of each one of Germany's World War I battle cruisers, from their design to their construction to their actual wartime service during World War I. Additionally, it provides commander data information, specifications for the ship, down to the number of boilers and boiler tubes. Looks really interesting, so I figured I'd pick it up and probably be digging through that early next week. But anyway, guys, back to Soviet Corps. When we last looked at the game, I was kind of talking about some YouTube copyright stuff that had come up and, my experience with it. But I was in the midst of playing the Finland scenario in Soviet Corps. So I'll talk a little bit about the history of that conflict. I will admit I'm not an expert, although I wouldn't really consider myself an expert in much of any history per se, just more of an enthusiast. But I'll talk a little bit about the conflict, which became commonly known as the Winter War. And what this conflict was a war between Finland and the Soviet Union. It started in late 1939. There is some dispute over what the Soviet goal actually was. But when it comes down to the war between Finland and Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time, I think the first thing that we need to look at is the fact that Finland was actually part of the Russian Empire for over 100 years before the Russian Revolution. It had been part of the Empire or Kingdom of Sweden, but in the 1800s it was taken over by the Russians and was basically a district in the Russian Empire. During the Russian Revolution, Finland would gain its independence as a state, and it ended up imposing a democracy. Relations between Russia and Finland were rocky, with Russian raids over the border into Finland, and additionally Finnish interventionism occurring during the Soviet Union, in the Soviet Union as well. The Soviets were also concerned with the proximity of Finland to St. Petersburg, to Leningrad at the time. The Russians did not trust the Germans, and despite signing a non-aggression pact with the Germans in the 1930s, Finland seemed to offer an easy avenue into Russia's flank in hinterland, and Leningrad or Stalingrad, Leningrad would be a sitting duck. So the Russians initially were negotiating for getting territory in Finland because they basically wanted to provide a buffer around Russia and Russia's vitals to protect them from Germany. Some of this was also seated in the desire to rebuild the Russian Empire to its former glory. There was a thought within the Soviet Union that the territorial boundaries of the Russian Empire were actually an ideal and secure makeup, whereas the boundaries of the Soviet Union were less than ideal and were largely built because of the compromises of the Soviet Union in its early days trying to gain stability. This matches up with the fact that Russia involved themselves in the invasion of Poland and took the eastern half of Poland. Surely they would have liked the western half as well, but they had an agreement with the Germans that gave them the eastern half. They also had an agreement with the Germans that gave them control over most of Eastern Europe. Again, a lot of these areas were territories that the Russian Empire had sacrificed as it came apart and the Soviet Union took over. As a result, the Russians were in the process of annexing the Baltic states, which gave a western blanket of security, added hundreds of miles to its buffer between mainland Russia and Germany. But it also provided a forward buffer against Leningrad being easily attacked, which was, I believe, Russia's second largest city at the time, behind the capital at Moscow. So relations between Finland and Russia were rocky for numerous reasons. Again, there were internal machinations on both sides within their politics. Many Finns were actually killed during the Russian purges, the Great Purges that Stalin implemented in 1938 of the military. Most of the senior members of the Finnish Communist Party were actually in Finland because Finland's Communist Party had been outlawed by the Finnish government, which was, again, another sore spot for the Soviet-Finnish relations. But then the Soviets go and kill most of the Finnish communists during the purge, and as a result, relations deteriorate further. The Russians try and negotiate territorial concessions with Finland, again with at least the concept of building a buffer around Leningrad. But unlike the Baltic states, who were bullied and pressured into ceding their sovereignty, or at least the early stages of ceding their sovereignty to the Soviets, the Finns begin to mobilize. The Finns also have strong border fortifications that you can see here in this game that I'm struggling to try and break through. And the Russians have a military that's been decimated by purges of almost all of their high-ranking officials within the last year. Nonetheless, the Finns refuse the Russian advances, and the Russians end up going to war with Finland. The war starts in late 1939, and it's called the Winter War because it basically goes from December of 1939 to March of 1940. The conflict was fought in the midst of one of the harshest winters in recent European history. It seems like we're always saying that when people decide to invade Russia, it's a bad idea, because when you invade it always seems like you end up getting hit by one of the worst winters in Russian history. Napoleon had to deal with a fierce Russian winter. Hitler had to deal with multiple fierce Russian winters, but the winter of 41 was especially cold. And the Russians had to deal with a fierce Finnish winter when they invaded Finland. I wonder if those winters were all really as fierce as people make them out to be, or if it was just normal that, hey, winter sucks in the Russian-Finnish area. I'm saying this as I record on April 2nd in Wisconsin, where it was 60 yesterday, and it's snowing today. Yeah. So don't invade Wisconsin either, because, yeah. But anyway, so the Russians invade. Their troops are ill-equipped, ill-prepared. They far outstrip the Finnish troops when it comes to the total amount of equipment and the quality of their equipment. The Finns are using second-hand gear or often a hodgepodge of equipment. The Finnish Air Force, for example, was using American Brewster Buffalo fighters. They were using German Fokker D-21 fighters. They were using British Blenheim 1 bombers. And they were also using, I believe, some German bombers as well. So they were using a hodgepodge collection of forces in the war. Additionally, the Finnish-Russian War, the Winter War, is interesting to me because it strikes me very similarly to the Boer War, which was between the British and the kind of the Boer republics during the late 1800s, in that the rest of the world was at peace at this time, if you exclude Asia, where Japan is in the midst of fighting China. And sadly, that theater doesn't get the same sort of attention in European media. So the world was more or less at peace, and all of a sudden you have a European nation in Russia attack seemingly without cause another European nation in Finland. And the world dramatically sides with Finland. You have massive support for the Finns. You even have volunteer troops leaving America, Britain, France, Germany even. You have all sorts of support going to Finland from the public community. And you have this juggernaut of a military up against a ill-equipped force. It's really a David Goliath situation. But the strong Finnish fortifications and the harsh winter and the poor skill of the Soviet troops means that you have a valiant defense occur. And while the Finns were eventually overwhelmed, the Soviets lost over 200,000 troops to winter and to combat. You have famous scenes of soldiers skiing into battle on the Finnish sides, skiing between positions, with rifles slung over their shoulders. Interestingly enough, some equipment that would perform very poorly during World War II seemed to have value during the Finnish War. The Finnish Brewster Buffaloes did pretty well against the Russian Air Force. That's something that this game doesn't seem to model. You don't really see much of a Finnish Air Force here. The Soviets kind of have free reins of the skies, which doesn't seem terribly accurate, but whatever. And the Finns put up a hell of a fight with basically no armor and just infantry and artillery. They stymie the Soviets for quite a while. It becomes so popular in Western European society that the British and the French, who are busy kowtowing to Germany at every possible opportunity before the Finnish War and before the invasion of Poland, actually decide, you know what, maybe we should come in on the side of the Finns, which is crazy when you think about it, because they're also fighting the Germans at this time. Germany had just invaded Poland, and now the British are talking about sending 100,000 troops, and the French are talking about sending 35,000 troops to aid the Finns. But that's because the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact seemingly made Russia and Germany allies. Now, the Western allies weren't ready to declare war on Russia outright, because, well, frankly, that would be crazy to do that if you don't have to. Yeah, sure, they're sort of nominally aligned, but at the same time, you definitely don't want to expand and fight another country, especially when Russia wasn't actively fighting the Western allies. But I wonder how that would have changed the world if the British and French had actually jumped in on the side of the Finns. The other crazy thing is when World War II would expand and the Soviets would eventually be invaded by Germany, the Finns would go back for revenge and would side with Germany and invade Russia with Germany. So you could have had this situation where Finland wants to get close with Germany after the war, but instead ends up being supported by the British and the French during the war. It's a rather convoluted situation. I apologize if I yawn there. It's about 1 a.m. here. But it's a fascinating conflict that eventually, without going into too much detail and boring you too much about kind of the back and forth, would end up being a Soviet victory, sort of. It was a victory in the sense that Finland gave up something like 12% of its population, 11% of its land, its second largest city, 30% of its economic output. All of these factors were territorial areas that were conceded from the Finns to the Soviets. At the same time, Finland did maintain its independence. It was not annexed. And it inflicted over 160,000 killed, over 180,000 wounded. It destroyed over 300 tanks, over 200 aircraft. Total casualties exceed 300,000 at the loss of 70,000 Finns. Now again, Finland was a much smaller country. They had 32 tanks when the war broke out. The Russians had over 2,000. They had 100 aircraft when the war broke out. The Russians had over 3,000. So when you consider those kind of factors, it's hard to say, that the Finns didn't do a good job, because they obviously did. But the result was that you had an embittered Finland looking for revenge, and that revenge would come something like 15 or 18 months after the end of the Finnish War, 15 months, where the Finns would end up siding with Germany in what was one of the least effective alliances in history, really. But you also have a near British-French intervention on the side of Finland, which again would have really made World War II confusing and convoluted. Does Russia go to war with the Allies, but then Germany invades Russia, and then Russia's fighting the Allies and Germany? That would be crazy, but the Allies are also fighting Germany. That would be insane. But anyway, that's a big woulda, coulda, shoulda. The end result is that neither Norway nor Sweden was willing to give the Western Allies, the French and the British, military access to their territory, so the Allies had no real way to effectively get troops to Finland. They wanted to use the railways that passed through both Norway and Sweden, and neither of those countries was willing to allow that. So the end result is that nothing happened. But it's a fascinating conflict to look into and research. There hasn't been enough written in the West about it. in my opinion. Digging through here, I was trying to get more details, and sure, there's a lot more information than what I provided on Wikipedia, but I'm always hesitant to trust Wikipedia too much, although it seems in major events they're generally pretty good. As you can tell, I'm struggling in this game. We're 16 out of 18 turns in, and to say the least, it doesn't look like we're going to achieve our objective. There's one more city in Finland here to the west that we need to try and race to and get to. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And this is a really tough scenario as far as a game's concerned to be able to play. Diving back into the gameplay, this is every bit as hard to play as any other scenario I've played in terms of the most difficult scenarios. The weather, the entrenchedness, that's not a word. The entrenched forces that you're fighting, and the number of anti-aircraft units, and the narrow corridor, because in this scenario, you can see, because of the way the lakes break up the terrain, you're really trying to force your way up a very narrow corridor, and the enemy has a large number of dug-in, artillery-supported infantry units. So I'm sure one of you out there who is far superior in this game to myself would be able to be like, you know what, historical gamer, you suck at this game. This is a really easy scenario. I beat it with my eyes closed. But that's certainly not the case for me. And I would say I probably don't have an ideal force disposition. I probably need more I feel like I have a lot of artillery, but I probably need, I don't know if armor is the way to go. Maybe air. I could use more air units. But then again, the Finns have very substantial anti-aircraft weaponry, so that's hard. I probably shouldn't have those troops up north. I feel like I'm getting diverted. But again, there's just these really narrow, tiny points that you have to try and cut through. And the enemy clogs them with heavily dug-in troops. You can see here we're going into the second to last turn. We're into turn 17. Our objective is in sight. You can see that they're off to the west, but I don't think I'm going to hit it. There's too many troops between me and the enemy. If you gave me 2 or 3 more turns, I would probably capture it with ease. But as it is, I don't have those 2 or 3 more turns, and I'm getting myself distracted on these northern towns, which really don't matter at all with some of my armor units. But the other thing is, it's easy to get yourself distracted and pull troops out of the front when you have such a narrow front. You can only bring a third or a quarter of your force to bear at any one time. The rest are just stacked up behind in reserve. Well, you might as well put your troops to some use and move them somewhere. At least that's kind of my thought process. But anyway, one question I do have for you guys is this scenario kind of slowly, ever so slowly, winds to a halt here in the next few minutes. I'm interested to hear what you guys think I should be doing as far as the channel is concerned. I've fallen in love with naval history right now. That's kind of everything I'm reading about. And as a result, I played the Rule the Waves series, and, that sparked a lot of it. Additionally, there's a lot of naval stuff in my other series that I'm doing right now on World War II. Hasn't been as popular as I'd hoped. It's a turn-based naval combat game that can really get kind of tedious and boring. But again, it's World War II naval combat, and at least as long as Germany has surface naval assets, it's really interesting, and it's been fun. But I'm interested to hear what you guys want to see. What type of games do you want me to play? I'm probably going to do Order of Battle Pacific Marines, which I believe comes out in like 6 or 7 days. Additionally, I got a copy of Victory and Glory, which is a new Napoleonic game, which seems to have some similarities with similarities with Fields of Glory, kind of the old classic classic Napoleonic game. It looks to be turn-based, kind of high strategy, but it looks to be interesting. So I'll probably take a look at that. But I'm not sure where else I should go with the channel right now. I'm thinking of diving back into Scourge of War. I didn't really ever give that too much of a look. I think, it's certainly a game that a lot of people would enjoy. So maybe I'll dive back in and do some of that. Napoleonic history isn't exactly my forte. I enjoy it, but I don't know it in any kind of depth. I just know very high level amount, probably about the kind of the amount that I've been talking about here for the Winter War. Whereas things like World War II or World War I or especially the American Civil War, I know in a bit more depth where I feel I can talk more credibly about it, so it makes me more willing to do series on those kind of things. You know, the history of something back and forth, it's more easy to kind of talk confidently and fluently and in a way that makes, I think, for good viewing. I think kind of the pinnacle example of that would be the Ultimate General series, where I played Ultimate General and talked about the history of the Battle of Gettysburg for like 10 hours or something like that. And the series seemed to be pretty well received. Also makes things like that easier to stream. I'd like to jump back into streaming, but I'm not very good at it, to be honest. And I don't know if many of the games I play are ideal for streaming. Then again, I don't really do a whole lot of editing either, so it'd just be kind of playing while doing this, but I'd worry I'd miss a lot. Again, I'm not exactly an expert when it comes to... Whoa, what the heck? I won? I didn't expect that. Alright, well... That was kind of cool. I didn't expect to get a minor victory or a major victory or whatever that was. I didn't take the final city, so that's odd. But I'll gladly take it. With that being said, guys, it looks like the next battle is going to be the German invasion of Russia, so it'll be interesting to see how that's handled. But I'm going to wait on doing that video until next time. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, you'll have to wait for my musing until next time. Anyway, thanks again, guys, and until next time, this is the Historical Gamer signing out.